Spring, 1983. Imagine a two-lane road just outside Springfield, Oregon, shrouded in the thick embrace of towering pines and an impenetrable darkness that seems to swallow everything in its path. Suddenly, the night is shattered by flashing blue and red lights, piercing the shadows like a desperate cry for help. Sirens wail through the stillness as a compact sedan, a beige Nissan Sentra station wagon, skids wildly into the emergency bay of Mackenzie-Willamette Hospital, its horn blaring incessantly, headlights glaring like unblinking eyes refusing to accept the horror that's unfolded. The driver, a 27-year-old woman named Diane Downs, stumbles out of the car, her hands slick and trembling with fresh blood, her voice raw and cracking with urgency. "My kids, please, help my kids," she pleads to the stunned hospital staff rushing toward her. Inside the vehicle, 3 small, fragile bodies lie slumped amid a chaotic tangle of blankets, shattered glass, and the metallic tang of blood. The air inside is thick, heavy with the acrid iron smell of gunpowder mingled with the raw, choking panic of a family torn apart in an instant. Paramedics spring into action with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance, their movements urgent yet methodical. They gently extract the children, one motionless and eerily still, another gasping in ragged, shallow sips of breath, the third blinking in wide-eyed, stunned silence, as if the world has suddenly become too overwhelming to comprehend. Compress. Stabilize. Check the airway. The commands fly like lifelines, turning words into orders, orders into frantic action, and action into a desperate race against the clock, where every second ticks like a heartbeat on the brink of fading. Over the radio, the alert crackles to life, 3 pediatric GSWs, gunshot wounds, en route or already here. The message ripples across Lane County, pulling medical teams and law enforcement from their routines into this unfolding nightmare. In the hospital corridors, doors slam with echoing finality, crash carts rattle down the halls like thunder, and the triage room erupts in a harsh, unforgiving white light that exposes every grim detail. Nurses, their faces masks of focused determination, cut through the children's blood-soaked clothing with swift scissors, probing for entry and exit wounds, urgently calling out for O-negative blood transfusions to stem the relentless bleeding. Somewhere in the background, a wall clock ticks relentlessly, a cruel reminder of time slipping away. Diane Downs, the mother, paces restlessly between the treatment rooms, her blonde hair matted and sticking to her sweat-dampened face, her hands fidgeting endlessly as if trying to grasp at something intangible. She bombards the staff with questions, but her eyes seem distant, as though she's not truly hearing the answers, like a person desperately attempting to outrun the cataclysmic moment that has just devoured her entire world. Her own arm bears a fresh bandage, a superficial wound that pales in comparison to the devastation around her, but she clutches it protectively, her composure cracking only in fleeting glimpses. On a night like this, even the smallest towns swell with significance, transforming into hubs of urgent activity. Detectives are roused from their sleep by urgent phone calls, directed straight to the hospital with little more than the barest details: a mother, 3 young children, gunfire ripping through the quiet. No clear context, no immediate suspect, just a lonely stretch of road that now feels infinitely longer and more ominous than any map could ever convey, hiding secrets in its darkened curves. The car remains parked under the emergency canopy, its doors flung open like broken wings that failed to carry its passengers to safety. Shards of glass dangle precariously from the shattered window frames, trembling with every whoosh of the automatic hospital doors. On the blood-streaked floorboard, a child's small shoe lies abandoned, its toe scuffed pale from playful adventures now forever interrupted. It's no longer just an object, it's evidence, a silent testament to innocence lost, though in this frantic moment, everyone treats it with the reverence of a fragile heartbeat still pulsing with possibility. In the trauma bays, physicians lean in close, their voices steady as they speak the careful language of fragile hope and grim reality. Pupils dilate and react to light, blood pressure inches upward against all odds. A nurse gently squeezes a tiny, cold hand, whispering promises of a brighter morning that hasn't yet proven itself worthy. In the hallways, the ambient hum shifts subtly, from despair to guarded optimism, the kind of whisper a close-knit town shares when daylight is still just a distant rumor on the horizon, holding its breath for miracles. But as the initial chaos subsides and the first waves of stabilization break, the inevitable questions flood in like an unrelenting tide. Who could possibly do this? Where exactly on that desolate road did it happen? Why this unassuming car, these innocent children, this seemingly ordinary night? The only person who might hold the answers stands alone under the buzzing fluorescent lights, her eyes shining with unshed tears, her breath catching in her throat, poised to unravel the unexplainable. She claims she saw a man, a shaggy-haired stranger emerging from the trees like a ghost, raising a gun without warning. And as the detectives switch on their tape recorder, leaning in with intent focus, her story begins to spill forth, one destined to echo far beyond this modest hospital, this sleepy town, and this fateful night, weaving itself into the fabric of one of America's most infamous true crime sagas. The interrogation room at the Lane County Sheriff's Office is stark and unforgiving, its walls coated in a dull beige that seems to absorb every flicker of raw emotion, leaving only echoes of tension in the air. Under the relentless hum of fluorescent bulbs that cast harsh shadows, Diane Downs sits at a scarred metal table, her hands nervously twisting a tissue that's already frayed and shredded at the edges. Her face is streaked with mascara-run tears, but her voice carries an eerie rhythm, like someone reciting a tale rehearsed countless times in the quiet recesses of her mind. She insists it all happened in a blur, a lone gunman, materializing from the shadowy underbrush along Old Mohawk Road, demanding her car at gunpoint. When she refused, she claims, he unleashed a hail of bullets, not on her, but directly on her 3 young children sleeping in the back. Detectives, seasoned veterans with eyes trained to spot the subtlest cracks in human facades, study her every move with meticulous care, noting the precise timing of each gesture, the length of every pregnant pause. On the surface, her story bears all the tragic hallmarks of a random act of violence, a mother's worst nightmare come to life. Yet, something in her delivery gnaws at them, an undercurrent that unsettles the room. Her tears arrive on cue, at the most poignant moments, but they evaporate almost as swiftly as they form, leaving her eyes dry and composed. Her tone wavers with apparent emotion, but her body language speaks of calculated control rather than the raw, shattering collapse of true grief. For these investigators, who've witnessed the unpredictable chaos of authentic sorrow, this is the first subtle fracture, a disconnect between her words and the visceral reality they should evoke. Hidden cameras roll silently, capturing every nuance for later scrutiny. The footage reveals Diane leaning forward dramatically, dabbing at her eyes with theatrical precision, yet in unguarded moments, her expression slips into something akin to detachment, as if she's narrating a distant acquaintance's misfortune rather than her own family's devastation. This performance elicits fleeting sympathy from some in the room, perhaps a junior officer moved by her apparent vulnerability, but it breeds quiet, growing skepticism among the leads. For a mother who's just endured the unthinkable, she appears oddly self-contained, her emotions compartmentalized in a way that feels rehearsed, almost scripted. As her account unfolds, doubts begin to multiply like shadows lengthening at dusk. Diane describes the stranger in vivid detail, a man with wild, shaggy hair, clad in nondescript clothing, standing on a remote road where traffic is scarce even in daylight, let alone under the cover of night. She recounts the event with an unusual, almost photographic clarity for someone who, by her own admission, was plunged into utter chaos and terror. Investigators exchange glances. Is this precision a sign of truth, or a fabrication straining under its own weight? Why does her description feel too polished, too devoid of the foggy haze that trauma often imposes on memory? Still, the gravity of the situation demands caution. Her children, 8-year-old Christy N., 7-year-old Cheryl Lynn, and 3-year-old Stephen Daniel, lie in hospital beds mere miles away, one already lost forever to the merciless wounds, the other 2 clinging precariously to life with machines sustaining their fragile existences. Officers tread delicately, hesitant to confront a woman who might genuinely be shattered by loss. But in the margins of their notepads, questions sharpen like blades. Why would a would-be carjacker bypass the adult driver entirely and target defenseless children in the back seat? Why escalate to lethal violence without any apparent gain, only to vanish into the woods without a trace, leaving the car and its occupants behind? Diane dabs at her eyes once more, then leans back in her chair with a heavy sigh, her voice softening to a near whisper. I begged him not to hurt them, she insists, her words lingering in the stale, recirculated air like a plea for belief. Yet, they fail to ground the scene in any tangible plausibility. For investigators accustomed to the wild, unpredictable manifestations of genuine grief, screams, collapses, incoherent rants, something here feels profoundly off. Grief is a storm, chaotic and unrelenting, but insincerity leaves its own telltale fingerprints, the too perfect pauses, the calculated glances, the absence of that soul-deep shatter. As the interrogation stretches into the weary hours of the night, another peculiar detail emerges, one that tilts the scales further toward suspicion. Diane herself sustains only a minor wound, a grazed forearm, bandaged neatly, described as a gunshot injury but appearing more like a superficial scratch than the scar of a life-or-death struggle. Compared to the catastrophic devastation inflicted on her children, multiple bullets tearing through vital organs, leaving one dead and the others in critical agony, the imbalance is jarring, almost theatrical. Why would a ruthless attacker spare the mother such mercy while showing none to the innocents? Outside the interview room, the hospital continues to buzz with frantic updates, nurses and doctors battling against the clock. Christy is stable but teetering on the edge, her young body fighting infection and shock. Danny hovers in a limbo between life and death, his tiny frame paralyzed from the waist down by a bullet that severed his spine. The staff pour every ounce of their expertise into the fight, but with each passing hour, the pressure mounts on the detectives. If Diane's tale of a phantom gunman holds true, a dangerous predator roams free in the Oregon woods, a threat to every family on those quiet roads. But if her story is a fabrication, the true danger might already be contained within these beige walls, sitting calmly across from them. And so, with resolve hardening in their eyes, the detectives prepare to delve deeper, knowing that the ultimate truth, whatever its horrifying shape, will be etched not just in Diane's words, but in the silent, undeniable scars borne by her surviving children, who may yet hold the key to unlocking the nightmare. The hospital corridors at Mackenzie-Willamette echo with the ceaseless rhythm of hurried footsteps, clipped voices barking orders, and the incessant beeps of monitors that serve as lifelines in the battle against death. Nurses dash past with trays laden with surgical instruments, their faces etched with grim concentration, sweat beading on their brows under the sterile glare. In the trauma bays, Diane's two surviving children, Christy and Danny, fight for every breath under the unforgiving fluorescent lights, their small bodies entangled in a web of wires, for tubes, and ventilators that hum and whir in uneven, anxious symphonies. Doctors hover with unyielding urgency, their gloved hands steady as steel, their eyes sharp and unblinking, knowing that in this arena, seconds can dictate the line between a future reclaimed and one forever extinguished. The air hangs heavy with the antiseptic sting of hope mingled with the unspoken weight of irreparable loss. Tragically, one child, 7-year-old Cheryl, has already slipped beyond the reach of even the most heroic medical efforts, her young life extinguished by bullets that ravaged her chest and heart. The announcement of her passing comes in a hushed tone, delivered with quiet respect to avoid shattering the fragile morale of the staff, but its impact reverberates like a thunderclap. For these dedicated professionals, who wage war against mortality every day, the death of a child is never routine, it's a profound wound that cuts to the core, a reminder of the limits of human intervention. Yet, there's no luxury of time to grieve or reflect, the focus pivots instantly to the survivors, channeling every resource into their fragile battles. The injuries are gruesome and severe, bullets having mercilessly torn through tender, developing tissue, shattering bones, puncturing lungs, and damaging spinal cords in ways that will alter lives forever. Surgeons operate with laser-like precision, stitching ruptured vessels, removing fragments of lead, and stabilizing what fragile structures remain. Blood transfusions pump steadily into tiny veins, gloved hands compress oozing wounds, and voices call out vital signs in rapid, rhythmic succession, pulse 120, BP dropping, push more fluids. At Christie's bedside, a compassionate nurse leans in close, her voice a soft murmur of encouragement to the girl who's too weak to respond, promising stories of playgrounds and sunshine once this nightmare fades. Every minuscule sign of progress, a faint eyelid flutter, a labored but steady breath, becomes a beacon, a lifeline clutched in the storm of uncertainty. As the medical drama unfolds, detailed reports begin to compile in crisp, clinical prose, bullet trajectories mapped with mathematical accuracy, distances calculated to imply shooter positioning, angles analyzed to suggest origin points. For the hovering investigators, these documents transcend mere medical summaries. They are mute but eloquent testimonies, forensic blueprints that will one day reconstruct the exact choreography of violence on that fateful road. The children's wounds aren't just physical markers of pain, they are evidentiary puzzles, whispering secrets about the true nature of the attack. As the long night bleeds into a pale morning, exhaustion etches deep lines into the faces of the medical staff, their eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, their movements slowed but never faltering. Still, no one abandons their vigil. In one examination room, a lead physician pauses, his brow furrowing as he notes something profoundly chilling. The patterns of the gunshot wounds, entry points high and angled downward, don't align with Diane's tale of an external assailant firing from the roadside. Instead, they suggest a shooter positioned inside the vehicle, perhaps even from the driver's seat, with intimate proximity to the victims. This revelation plants deeper seeds of doubt, transforming medical observations into damning investigative leads. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit waiting area, Diane's behavior oscillates unpredictably between bouts of tears and oddly calm, detached explanations. To casual observers, she might appear distraught, even on the verge of hysteria, clutching tissues and rocking slightly. But to the more discerning eyes, nurses who've seen countless grieving parents, detectives quietly monitoring from afar, her grief seems muted, performative, lacking the visceral urgency one expects from a mother whose world has imploded. She inquires about her children's conditions, but her questions come laced with a strange casualness, as if discussing the weather rather than life and death struggles. Detectives, jotting notes in the shadows, begin cross-referencing this hospital demeanor with the composed figure they interviewed earlier, piecing together a portrait of inconsistency. For Christy and Danny, each painstaking moment forward is laced with profound uncertainty, not just the physical battle for survival, but the looming potential to reclaim their voices, to heal enough to recount the truth, and perhaps one day articulate the betrayal that no child should ever endure. Their resilience becomes both a medical miracle and a potential investigative bombshell, for if they regain strength and speech, they could shatter the facade of Diane's narrative, exposing a horror far more intimate than a stranger's random rage. And as the exhausted medical team pushes through waves of fatigue and mounting fear, the investigators circling outside tighten their net around the central enigma. Could the elaborate story Diane spun, of a shadowy stranger with a gun, already be fraying at the edges under the dual scrutiny of medical science and unyielding evidence? The hospital, once a sanctuary of healing, now pulses with the undercurrent of a deepening mystery, where every vital sign and whispered update edges closer to unveiling the unthinkable. In the days following the shooting, the intense spotlight pivots from the fluorescent-lit chaos of hospital emergency rooms to the methodical, sterile confines of law enforcement offices in Eugene, Oregon. Detectives huddle around cluttered tables strewn with scribbled notes, grainy crime scene photographs, interview transcripts, and steaming coffee cups, meticulously dissecting every syllable Diane Downs has uttered since that blood-soaked night. Her account, of a disheveled, shaggy-haired stranger emerging from the roadside shadows, demanding her car keys at gunpoint, then inexplicably turning his weapon on her sleeping children, appears deceptively straightforward at first glance. But simplicity, as these officers know all too well, can often mask the most insidious deceptions, like a calm surface hiding turbulent depths below. The initial cracks in her facade surface during attempts to reconstruct the precise timeline of events. Diane adamantly claims she drove straight to the hospital immediately after the attack, her only focus on saving her children. Yet, when investigators map the distance from the alleged crime scene on Old Mohawk Road, a remote, winding stretch flanked by dense forest, to the hospital, her arrival time indicates an inexplicable delay of at least 20 to 30 minutes. Was she disoriented in shock, wandering in a daze? Or was she deliberately stalling, perhaps to stage elements of her story or to ensure the wounds had time to set in a certain way? This temporal discrepancy hangs like a dark cloud, eroding the foundation of her narrative. Further inconsistencies emerge in her evolving descriptions of the assailant. In one retelling, his hair is long and unkempt, in another, it's shorter, more tousled. The exact angle from which he allegedly fired shifts subtly, sometimes from the driver's side window, other times reaching across her. She alternates between claiming a heated argument ensued and insisting he spoke barely a word before pulling the trigger. These are minor variations on the surface, the kind that could be attributed to trauma's fog, but to seasoned detectives like Jim Hugener and Paul Alton, they signal a story buckling under its own improvisations, a fabrication adapting on the fly but failing to cohere. Even more damning are the physical anomalies that defy logic. Diane insists the gunman leaned into the car to unleash the shots, implying an external, opportunistic attack. Yet, forensic analysis of the bullet wounds on the children, Christie's arm and chest grazed, Cheryl's fatal chest perforations, Danny's spinal severance, reveals trajectories that point unequivocally to shots fired from within the vehicle, at close range and downward angles consistent with the driver's position. Ballistics experts, consulting diagrams and rod insertions through the car's panels, quietly affirm, if a stranger had fired from outside, as Diane described, the paths simply wouldn't match. This is no minor quibble, it's a catastrophic contradiction that dismantles her tale piece by piece. Then there's the enigma of Diane's own injury, a single, shallow gunshot wound to her left forearm, neatly bandaged and healing rapidly. Detectives probe why a supposedly ruthless carjacker, driven by violent intent, would inflict such a glancing blow on the resistant adult while directing lethal precision at the children. The disparity feels orchestrated, almost self-inflicted, a calculated graze to lend credibility to her victimhood. Whispers among the team grow, could Diane have shot herself post-attack, staging the wound to bolster her phantom gunman story? Her post-incident behavior only amplifies the unease. In subsequent interviews, Diane occasionally erupts into inappropriate laughter, or veers into protracted, eerily serene monologues about unrelated topics, like her favorite music or past romances. At one particularly jarring moment, she animatedly discusses her car's recent mechanical issues with more fervor and detail than she musters for her children's precarious conditions. These lapses don't outright prove culpability, but they deepen the well of suspicion. Detectives, drawing from years of profiling, recognize that while grief manifests in myriad unpredictable ways, rage, numbness, denial, deception follows more predictable patterns, the averted eyes, the overcompensated emotions, the selective memory. As these inconsistencies accumulate like mounting evidence in a courtroom exhibit, the image of a random roadside gunman dissolves into implausibility. Yet, the investigators remain methodical, wary of leaping to conclusions without irrefutable proof, lest the case devolve into mere speculation. They crave something concrete, a smoking gun, literally or figuratively, that links the bullets not to an elusive shadow, but directly to the mother who claims innocence. Thus, the investigative lens sharpens on the vehicle itself, the compact Nissan station wagon that ferried the family into that night of terror. Technicians are summoned to scour every inch, every crevice, every lingering trace. For if the truth resides anywhere in this tangled web, it's embedded in the mute eloquence of twisted metal, scattered glass, and the faint echoes of gunpowder residue, waiting to reveal the secrets Diane may have hoped would remain buried forever. The compact Nissan Sentra station wagon, once a mundane family vehicle, now sits isolated under the glaring floodlights of the Lane County Police impound lot, its battered frame transformed into a frozen tableau of crime. Forensic technicians in crisp white coveralls encircle it with deliberate, almost reverent slowness, their cameras clicking incessantly to capture every angle, every dent, every speck of evidence. To these experts, this car is no longer a mere mode of transport, it's an impartial witness, a repository of truths that cannot be coerced or manipulated, speaking volumes through its silent scars. The examination begins with the shattered glass, fragments clinging tenaciously to the window frames like jagged remnants of a shattered dream. Others lie scattered across the blood-stained seats and floor mats, their distribution telling a story of force and direction. If the shots had indeed come from an external assailant, as Diane claimed, the glass should have imploded inward, propelled by outward-firing bullets. But here, the fracture patterns bloom outward in explosive sprays, irrefutable proof that the gunfire originated from inside the car, close, intimate, and controlled. This single observation begins to erode the foundation of Diane's roadside ambush narrative, exposing it as a fragile illusion. Next, the team meticulously traces the bullet paths, inserting slender metal rods through the entry and exit holes punctured in the vehicle's door panels and upholstery. The alignments are precise and unforgiving, converging not toward the open road or a hypothetical stranger's position, but unmistakably back to the driver's side, the very seat Diane occupied that night. Each trajectory line reinforces a harrowing conclusion: the shooter was not an outsider leaning in, but someone seated within, at point-blank range, with chilling proximity to the vulnerable children. Too close for coincidence, too intimate for a random act. The murder weapon, a .22 caliber Ruger pistol registered to Diane herself, remains missing, discarded somewhere along the Willamette River as later investigations would suggest, but its ghostly imprint endures. Gunshot residue, those microscopic particles of burned propellant, cling stubbornly to surfaces like invisible accusations. Swab tests reveal concentrations on the driver's door handle, the interior paneling, and even the steering wheel, locations incompatible with an external shooter. To the detectives reviewing the reports, this residue is as incriminating as a signed confession, painting a picture of Diane's hand wielding the gun from her position of power. Perhaps most revealing is what's absent: no foreign fingerprints smudged on the doors or windows, no signs of forced entry or a frantic struggle, no displaced items suggesting a confrontation with an intruder. The car's interior is disturbingly orderly, as if the only disruption that night was the calculated burst of gunfire itself. This lack of chaos speaks louder than any presence could, implying not a chaotic ambush, but a meticulously controlled execution. No stranger's touch marred this vehicle, no outsider's footprint disturbed the scene. Investigators begin to reframe the car not as the victim of a random attack, but as a deliberate stage, a confined space where a mother, behind the wheel, could turn a weapon on her own with cold precision, then weave a tale of escape. Diane's fabricated story, the lurking phantom, the desperate plea, the heroic drive to the hospital, crumbles entirely under this avalanche of physical testimony from metal, glass, and chemical traces. Yet, for all its technical weight, this evidence remains somewhat abstract, reliant on scientific jargon that might not sway a jury's hearts. Detectives understand that to secure conviction, they must paint a fuller human portrait, one that uncovers motive, delving into the why behind the horror. Without it, the defense could dismiss the forensics as circumstantial, mere suggestions of possibility rather than ironclad certainty. As the impound lot falls silent under the evening sky, one undeniable truth crystallizes: that isolated Oregon road harbored no mysterious stranger that night. The violence was born and contained within the confines of that car, a self-contained chamber of betrayal. Now, with the vehicle's secrets laid bare, the investigators pivot their gaze to the woman at its center, to Diane Downs' turbulent life, her hidden desires, her buried resentments. If the car has revealed the how of the crime, Diane's own history promises to illuminate the why, unraveling the threads of obsession that led to such unimaginable darkness. As the investigative team delves deeper into Diane Downs' personal history, a far more complex and disturbing portrait emerges, one that shatters the facade of a devoted, grieving mother and reveals a woman driven by unquenchable cravings for freedom, romance, and self-fulfillment. Friends, neighbors, ex-colleagues from her job as a U.S. Postal Service mail carrier, and former lovers paint a consistent picture of someone who viewed her children not as cherished gifts, but as burdensome anchors chaining her to a life of mundane drudgery. To the detectives piecing together this mosaic, these revelations transcend idle gossip, they crystallize into a compelling motive, the fuel for a crime that defies maternal instinct. Diane's relational history unfolds like a turbulent novel, marked by a pattern of instability and pursuit. Born Elizabeth Diane Fredrickson in 1955 in Phoenix, Arizona, to a strict, abusive family, she married her high school sweetheart Steve Downs at 18, but the union quickly soured amid infidelity and volatility. By the time of the shooting, they were divorced, with Diane engaging in a string of passionate affairs, often with married men who offered excitement but balked at the responsibilities of her ready-made family. One lover in particular, Robert "Nick" Knickerbocker, a co-worker from the post office, looms large in the narrative. Investigators learn that Diane was obsessively infatuated with him, confiding to friends that her children were the primary obstacles preventing their union. Nick himself would later tell police that Diane had explicitly stated her kids were in the way, a chilling admission that echoes like a prelude to tragedy. Co-workers at the Chandler, Arizona, post office, where Diane had worked before relocating to Oregon, recall her frequent, vocal disdain for the demands of single motherhood. She often portrayed herself as a victim of circumstance, trapped in a cycle of diaper changes, school runs, and financial strain, yearning for the unencumbered passion she believed she deserved. "The kids are ruining my life," she'd lament in break-room conversations, her tone laced with resentment rather than affection. To law enforcement, these offhand remarks now read as ominous foreshadows, the verbal breadcrumbs of a mind teetering toward the unthinkable. Financial pressures only exacerbated her frustrations. Supporting 3 children on a modest postal salary left Diane perpetually restless, her dreams of escape manifesting in fantasies of eloping with lovers or starting anew unburdened. She accrued debts, bounced checks, and even explored surrogacy as a side hustle, once carrying a child for another couple to earn extra money, a decision that highlighted her pragmatic, detached view of parenthood. Investigators uncover letters and journal entries where she romanticizes a child-free existence, words that now pulse with sinister intent when juxtaposed against the bloodshed. Even her actions in the immediate aftermath of the shooting fuel suspicion. While Christy and Danny battled for life in intensive care, Diane was overheard in hospital hallways gushing about rekindling her romance with Nick, who had ended their affair months prior due to her intensity. Her focus seemed fixated on personal desires, sending flirtatious letters to him from her recovery bed, rather than the agony of her offspring. One particularly eerie detail, upon arriving at the hospital, her car radio was blaring Duran Duran's "Hungry Like the Wolf," a upbeat track that clashed grotesquely with the scene, as if Diane had tuned it up to drown out the echoes of her deeds. Psychological consultants brought in by the prosecution, including experts in narcissistic personality disorders, offer a clinical lens. Diane exhibited traits of narcissism, manipulation, and obsessive attachment, viewing her children as extensions of herself to be discarded when inconvenient. This theory illuminates the cold calculus of that night: the children gravely targeted, Diane merely grazed in a self-inflicted bid for sympathy. It was, they posit, a desperate bid to eliminate barriers and win back Nick, who had made clear he wanted no part in raising another man's kids. As this psychological and biographical evidence mounts, the investigators grasp that the crime wasn't a spur-of-the-moment impulse but the culmination of Diane's simmering obsessions and resentments, a meticulously planned erasure disguised as random violence. The remote road, the discarded gun, the fabricated stranger, all elements in a scheme born from a toxic brew of selfishness and delusion. Yet, for all the damning insights, one crucial piece remains elusive: direct accounts from those who endured the horror firsthand. If the surviving children can muster the strength to speak, their unfiltered testimonies could slice through the fog of circumstantial evidence, affirming what the clues already scream. And so, the spotlight returns to the hospital wards, where Christy Downs, against staggering odds, begins to stir, her voice emerging from the silence like a fragile but piercing light. What she reveals will not only shatter illusions but redefine the entire trajectory of justice. In the hushed, antiseptic confines of the pediatric intensive care unit, the arduous fight for mere survival gradually evolves into a tentative path toward recovery and reclamation. Fresh bandages swathe small, battered limbs, sophisticated machines vigilantly track heart rates and oxygen levels, and dedicated nurses murmur words of gentle encouragement, their tones calibrated to soothe without overwhelming. Miraculously, against a backdrop of dire prognosis, one of Diane Downs' children, 8-year-old Christy, begins to show signs of resilience, her vital signs stabilizing day by painstaking day. Strength returns in increments, first consciousness, then movement, and finally, speech. For the waiting investigators, this awakening is the pivotal moment they've prayed for, a potential gateway to unvarnished truth. Initially, Christie's words emerge fractured and halting, burdened by the dual weights of physical trauma and psychological scars that no child should bear. Physicians and child psychologists sit nearby, carefully monitoring her stress levels, ensuring that the gentle questioning doesn't exacerbate her fragile state. But as fragments coalesce into coherence, a narrative takes shape, one that bears no resemblance to Diane's tale of a shaggy-haired intruder. Instead, in a voice trembling with remembered terror, Christie recounts the unthinkable. The shots rang out from inside the car, originating from the front seat, from the hands of her own mother. There was no stranger, no carjacking demand, only the chilling sight of Diane turning the .22 caliber pistol toward her sleeping siblings, the blasts echoing in the confined space like thunderclaps of betrayal. This revelation lands like a bombshell, devastating in its simplicity yet explanatory in its scope. It aligns perfectly with the forensic puzzles, the inward trajectories, the internal residue, the staged inconsistencies in Diane's interviews. What detectives had whispered in strategy sessions now finds unequivocal voice in the most poignant, innocent testimony conceivable, a child's unadorned truth, fragile yet unbreakable, piercing the veil of maternal deception with heartbreaking clarity. Police and prosecutors handle this disclosure with utmost gravity, aware that a young girl accusing her parent of such monstrosity is a rarity fraught with emotional landmines. Yet, Christie's details remain consistent across sessions, the metallic gleam of the gun in Diane's grip, the acrid smell of smoke filling the car, the overwhelming sense of confusion and betrayal that no vocabulary can fully capture. It's a recounting no one wishes to hear, yet one that demands to be believed. To safeguard against accusations of coercion, court-appointed child psychologists and trauma specialists conduct thorough evaluations. They detect no fabrications, no signs of adult influence or implanted memories, only the raw authenticity of lived horror. What surfaces is a painfully lucid truth: Christie, Cheryl, and Danny were not casualties of a faceless phantom but deliberate victims of their mother's calculated rage, targeted in a bid to erase them from her path to perceived freedom. For the investigative team, the case transforms overnight. What began as a web of circumstantial threads, ballistics mismatches, timeline gaps, behavioral oddities, now stands fortified on the bedrock of eyewitness testimony from the epicenter of the crime. Christie evolves from mere victim to cornerstone witness, her words reverberating through every briefing, every evidentiary file, infusing the prosecution with unassailable momentum. Meanwhile, Diane clings tenaciously to her fabricated narrative, portraying herself as the beleaguered mother ensnared in a tragic misunderstanding. Yet, even as she protests, the resonant power of her daughter's voice begins to eclipse her denials, rendering them hollow. For the detectives, doubt evaporates, guilt is no longer a hypothesis but a foregone conclusion. The challenge shifts to constructing an airtight case capable of convincing a jury of what a brave child has already articulated with such devastating precision. The hospital room, once solely a haven for healing, now doubles as the investigation's fulcrum, a turning point where innocence has asserted itself against deception. Because in that sterile space, a young girl has spoken, and her truth cannot be silenced or dismissed. And with this pivotal testimony secured, alongside the mounting forensic arsenal, the case propels into its most scrutinized phase. The courtroom beckons, drawing not just local attention but the rapt gaze of a nation transfixed by the spectacle of maternal betrayal. The trial of Diane Downs is poised to unfold, a drama where facts will clash with fiction under the unyielding light of justice. The Lane County Courthouse in Eugene, Oregon, transforms into a grand theater of justice, its stone steps teeming with a throng of reporters clutching microphones, camera crews angling for shots, and throngs of curious onlookers drawn by the macabre lure. By the summer of 1984, what began as a local Oregon tragedy has ballooned into a national obsession, captivating headlines and evening news broadcasts across America. The notion of a seemingly ordinary young mother accused of coldly shooting her own children to pursue a forbidden romance strikes at the heart of societal fears, blending horror with disbelief. Inside the wood-paneled courtroom, every bench is occupied, the air thick with anticipation. The trial of Diane Elizabeth Downs is about to commence, under the stern gaze of Judge Foote. Prosecutors, led by the tenacious Fred Hugener, launched their case with a narrative that sends chills rippling through the gallery. They depict Diane as a woman devoured by narcissistic obsession, desperate to shed the shackles of motherhood to chase an unattainable life with her ex-lover, Nick Knickerbocker. Piece by piece, they unveil the evidence, intricate ballistic reports illustrating internal gunfire, forensic analyses of residue and glass patterns, the glaring contradictions riddling Diane's ever-shifting statements, and, most heart-wrenchingly, the direct testimony of her surviving daughter. Each exhibit strikes like a hammer blow, dismantling the myth of the phantom gunman and exposing a premeditated act of filial elimination. The defense, spearheaded by attorney Jim Jagger, counters with fierce resolve, framing Diane as the scapegoat of a hasty, biased investigation. They propose alternate theories: a real carjacker overlooked in the rush to judgment, perhaps linked to local drug rings or transients, and challenge the dependability of Christie's memory, suggesting it was tainted by trauma, leading questions, or subconscious influence. Their tactic is textbook: sow seeds of reasonable doubt, no matter how tenuous, in the jurors' minds, portraying Diane as a flawed but innocent woman vilified by circumstance. Diane herself emerges as the trial's most enigmatic and unsettling presence. Taking the stand, she oscillates between scripted sobs and inexplicable poise, often flashing smiles or injecting ill-timed humor that leaves the courtroom in stunned silence. Her demeanor radiates a bizarre detachment from the proceeding's severity, where most defendants exhibit remorse, anxiety, or desperation. Diane exudes an odd confidence, as if convinced her charm can sway the narrative. In one infamous moment, she reenacts the shooting for the jury with exaggerated gestures, her tone almost playful, further alienating observers who expected maternal anguish. Spectators and jurors alike note the profound disconnect. She recounts her own superficial wound with dramatic flair, gesturing to the scar as if it were a badge of heroism, yet glosses over her children's suffering with clinical brevity. At times, she fusses with her appearance, smoothing her permed hair, adjusting her blouse, or directs coy glances toward the jury box, behaviors that, rather than evoking pity, reinforce perceptions of a woman devoid of the fundamental maternal instinct she's accused of violating. Her performance, intended perhaps to humanize, instead cements her as an outlier, a figure whose lack of empathy becomes its own indictment. The trial's emotional zenith arrives with the testimony of Christy Downs. The courtroom hushes to a reverent silence as the 9-year-old, still bearing physical scars and walking with a limp, takes the stand. In a voice soft but steady, laced with the innocence of youth yet weighted by unimaginable pain, she recounts the night's horrors, her mother's calm demeanor turning lethal, the gun's muzzle flashing in the dim interior light, the screams of her siblings cut short. "Mommy shot us," she states simply, her words hanging in the air like a verdict already rendered. The impact is visceral, jurors lean in, some dabbing at tears, the gallery murmuring in hushed shock. It's a moment no parent in the room can fathom, yet one that resonates with unassailable authenticity. The prosecution capitalizes masterfully, interlacing Christie's account with the broader evidentiary tapestry, Diane's obsessive letters to Nick professing love and lamenting her burdens, the financial strains, the psychological profile of narcissism, and the irrefutable forensics. Layer by layer, they construct an indelible mosaic of premeditated betrayal and violence, one that no conjured stranger can obscure. As closing arguments loom, the courtroom crackles with tension, the cumulative weight of revelations bearing down on all present. The query is no longer Diane's guilt in the investigator's eyes, it's whether 12 everyday citizens, sifting through the emotional wreckage, will align with the evidence's inexorable pull. And soon, they will deliver their answer. For when the jury reconvenes, their decision will not merely seal Diane's destiny but etch one of the most harrowing chapters into the chronicles of American true crime, a tale of maternal monstrosity that continues to haunt. The courtroom falls into a profound hush, the sort of weighted silence that amplifies every rustle of paper, every shifted foot, carrying the gravity of lives forever altered. After exhaustive weeks of wrenching testimonies, fierce cross-examinations, and evidence dissected under microscopic scrutiny, the 12 jurors file solemnly back to their box, their faces inscrutable masks of deliberation. All eyes rivet upon them, reporters with pens poised, spectators gripping armrests, and Diane Downs at the defense table, maintaining her characteristic veneer of unnerving calm, her eyes scanning the room as if still scripting the outcome. The culmination has arrived. The foreman stands, clutching the verdict form that will indelibly inscribe Diane's legacy. Judge Foote intones the ritual question, his voice resounding through the chamber, "What say you on the charges?" The response is delivered with measured finality, each word a thunderbolt: guilty on all counts, murder in the death of Cheryl, attempted murder for Christy and Danny, and assault with a deadly weapon. The room exhales collectively, then erupts in a cacophony of gasps, subdued whispers, and stifled sobs. For the victim's extended family, the tireless investigators, and a transfixed nation that has devoured every development, the verdict delivers a bittersweet blend of justice attained and the enduring ache of irreparable loss. As the reality sinks in, the judge addresses Diane directly, his tone grave as he pronounces her fate: life imprisonment for the murder, plus an additional 50 years for the attempts, with no eligibility for parole for at least 25 years. It's a sentence calibrated to mirror the enormity of her crimes, ensuring she remains confined long after her surviving children have forged their own paths, her story relegated to the dusty annals of infamy. The penalty underscores society's collective revulsion at the profound betrayal of maternal trust. Observers scrutinize Diane's response, anticipating a crack in her facade, perhaps tears of remorse, outbursts of denial, or flashes of rage. Instead, she remains stoically defiant, her expression bordering on smug, occasionally smirking as if the proceedings were a minor inconvenience she could charm her way out of. This lack of contrition only amplifies the chill in the room, reinforcing the prosecution's portrait of a remorseless narcissist. In the public gallery, emotions surge unchecked. Relatives weep openly, their relief intertwined with profound sorrow for the innocent stolen. Investigators, who maintain stoic professionalism throughout, finally permit subtle sighs of vindication. Nurses and doctors who battle to save Christy and Danny attend the sentencing, their presence a quiet testament to the human cost, their faces reflecting a hard-won sense of closure. Outside, the media frenzy intensifies, with reporters swarming the steps as headlines blaze nationwide: mother convicted in shocking child shootings, Diane Downs guilty, betrayal behind the wheel. Pundits and true crime analysts dissect the case as one of the most egregious instances of parental treachery in contemporary history, a stark cautionary tale that evil can lurk within the sanctity of family. For countless Americans, the trial serves as a jarring awakening, eroding the illusion of safety in the home. Behind the iron bars of the Oregon Women's Correctional Center, Diane transitions from free woman to lifelong inmate, but the ramifications of her actions extend far beyond her cell. She continues to proclaim innocence, filing appeals and granting interviews where she spins tales of conspiracies and overlooked evidence, her denial a further insult to those she harmed. Her surviving children, adopted by prosecutor Fred Hugener and his wife, bear lifelong scars, Christy with emotional trauma, Danny with permanent paralysis, yet they persevere, their resilience a counterpoint to their mother's darkness. The trial's conclusion marks not an end, but a lingering echo. Long after the gavel's final strike, the enigma persists: how does a mother summon the capacity to annihilate her own? The answer, shrouded in psychological shadows, guarantees Diane Downs' enduring notoriety as a symbol of ultimate betrayal. As the courthouse clears and the spotlights dim, one immutable truth endures: while the nation has its verdict, the specter of this atrocity refuses to vanish, casting long shadows into personal memories, historical records, and the lives irrevocably transformed by one woman's fatal choices. In the decades since the gavel fell in that Eugene courtroom, the name Diane Downs has solidified as an indelible entry in the grim ledger of American true crime, synonymous with the most visceral form of betrayal, the deliberate sabotage of the sacred parent-child bond. For a society perpetually grappling with the boundaries of human depravity, her story transcends mere chronicle, it evolves into a cultural touchstone, revisited in podcasts, documentaries, and books that probe the psyche's darkest corners. Long after the echoes of testimony faded, the repercussions continued to ripple through the lives touched by her actions, a testament to trauma's enduring grip. For the surviving children, Christy and Danny, now adults who've chosen privacy over publicity, the journey forward was a labyrinth of challenges, both visible and concealed. Their bodies retained the physical imprints of that night, Danny's wheelchair-bound existence due to his severed spine, Christy's lingering scars from bullets that grazed her arm and chest. But the invisible wounds ran deeper, nightmares replaying the gunfire, therapy sessions unpacking layers of betrayal, the constant negotiation of identity as survivors of maternal violence. Adopted by the Huguenots, they found stability in a nurturing home, yet each milestone, graduations, marriages, their own children, carried the phantom weight of what was stolen, a sister gone, a childhood fractured, a mother's love revealed as illusion. Christie's courtroom bravery became her anchor, empowering her to advocate quietly for child victims, while Danny's resilience inspired those facing disabilities, turning personal horror into quiet triumphs. The investigators and medical personnel involved carried their own burdens into the years ahead. Lead Detective Paul Alton spoke in later interviews of the case's haunting persistence, the timbre of Christie's testimony accusing her mother, the vacant stare in Diane's eyes during interrogations, the visceral scenes at the hospital that replayed in quiet moments. For many, it wasn't just a file closed, it was a scar etched into their professional souls, a reminder that monstrosity can masquerade as normalcy. Retirements brought reflections, with some like surgeon John Mackey noting how the case reinforced their commitment to pediatric care, honoring the lives they couldn't save by fighting harder for others. On a national scale, Diane Downs' saga became emblematic of internalized terror, challenging the archetype of external threats. In an era when true crime was burgeoning, fueled by shows like Unsolved Mysteries, and Rule's best-selling book, Small Sacrifices, which immortalized the case, America confronted the unsettling reality that peril could emanate from within the family unit, not just shadowy strangers. Miniseries adaptations, including the 1989 ABC production starring Farrah Fawcett as a chillingly charismatic Diane, reignited public discourse, sparking debates on mental health, narcissism, and the warning signs of domestic danger. The case influenced legal precedents on child testimony, emphasizing protections for young witnesses in high-stakes trials. Diane herself, serving her sentence without parole until at least 2009, when attempts were denied, never wavered from her claims of innocence. From prison, she birthed another child in 1984 via artificial insemination, Rebecca, immediately placed for adoption, adding layers of controversy to her profile. Her persistent appeals, media appearances, and self-published writings painted her as a wronged victim of systemic bias, but they only heightened public disdain, cementing her as a paragon of unrepentant selfishness. Escape's attempts in 1987, where she fled for 10 days before recapture, further underscored her manipulative nature, extending her sentence. Time's passage has done little to soften the edges of her infamy. New generations, discovering the story through streaming series or viral TikToks, react with the same visceral shock as those who witnessed the trial live. Her name invokes the unthinkable in discussions of filicide, a shorthand for when love curdles into lethality. Yet, woven through the bleakness is a thread of unyielding resilience. Christy and Danny's ability to build fulfilling lives, careers, families, purpose, stands as a defiant rebuke to Diane's attempts to erase them. Their stories ensure the narrative isn't solely about destruction but about survival's quiet power, preventing Diane's lies from burying the truth. Ultimately, the legacy of Diane Downs belongs less to her than to those who withstood her, the children who endured, the investigators who pursued justice, the community that rallied, and the nation that learned. It serves as an eternal vigilance etched into collective consciousness. Evil isn't always a lurking silhouette in the forest, often, it hides behind the most trusted smiles. The shadow cast by Diane Downs endures, not as a fading echo, but as a permanent scar on history's canvas, a stark warning of innocence's vulnerability when the bonds of trust fracture irreparably. And in that shadow, we find not just horror, but the imperative to safeguard the fragile light of familial love against the darkness within.